Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Benjamin, and today we're continuing our series on the history of the United States. And we're talking about the Federalists, or more accurately, the Federalist Papers and the arguments in favor of ratification of the Constitution. Last week we talked about the Constitutional Convention, and I decided we're not going to read the Constitution. We're not going to do a summary of that. We might do that for the Bill of Rights, but not for the Constitution as a whole. If you like the channel, likes, comments, subscriptions, they always do help, and I greatly appreciate them. Important links are down in the description. And so, yeah, we're talking about the Federalists today. And on screen, you've got Alexander Hamilton, who is probably the most famous of the Federalists and of the authors of the Federalist Papers. And we're going to talk next week about their opponents, those who were against ratification, because contrary to what you've probably been taught in American history or in high school or middle school or anything like that, ratification of the Constitution was not a foregone conclusion. There were a few states that really could have not just held things up, but prevented it altogether. Because the southern states, for the most part, took Virginia as a lead. New York was very split, and so was Massachusetts. And those three states, by the way, the New England states, for the most part, they all took Massachusetts for their lead. Yeah. But anyway, the main writers of the Federalist Papers were Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay. And trust me when I say all three are very important figures in American history. That said, I do have slight problems with how Alexander Hamilton is remembered today. He was not the hero that his musical makes him out to be. Yeah, that I've looked at it. I've looked at kind of the plot and all that. They really play up Alexander Hamilton as some sort of hero of democracy. The guy was a freaking monarchist. If you want to know how deranged Alexander Hamilton really was, watch the HBO miniseries John Adams. It's very good, very well done, and it's very good history. There are some areas where they've let the entertainment value take precedence, but overall, it is very good history. Yeah, Alexander Hamilton really did, when the French Revolution started getting truly out of hand, he wanted to seize all territory east of the Mississippi, not just New Orleans, Nolens, which was an important port city, and a lot of Americans wanted to purchase that territory. And we'll talk about that at some point. Alexander Hamilton also wanted to seize Spanish Florida. Yeah. Hamilton wanted a standing army. Yeah. The guy was not a friend of liberty, okay? He was a strong proponent of the Alien and Sedition Acts. He thought they didn't go far enough. Yeah, so Hamilton, the musical, is terrible history. Not just terrible history, it's downright propaganda. Truthfully, the people who favor big government today don't quite... if you want to... They think being compared to Hamilton is some sort of compliment. It's not. The guy was a monarchist. He wasn't exactly against the British system. And I think he actually would have been okay with remaining a part of Britain. He just favored the colonials. He was just a patriot because he saw that as uh, better for his pocketbook. But I kind of digress. Madison is a very interesting figure, and he was probably along with John Jay, a moderating force on Alexander Hamilton. Um, Federalist 10 is, of course, one of the one of the more important of the Federalist Papers, and that one was Hamilton. And some people who were in favor of small government will pick and choose certain arguments from some of the Federalist Papers, predominantly Madison and Jay's, but Federalist 10 does come into it. I sometimes allude to Federalist 10 in certain pro-Second Amendment comments I make. But really, I tend to disfavor the Federalist Papers. Now, the whole point of this argument was that the Constitution was necessary to address the ills of the Articles of Confederation. That is, that there was no executive in the Articles. There was no power for the national government to tax, not without universal consent from all the states, which you're never going to get, by the way, because southern states are never going to vote in order to increase tariffs because they like low costs, they like low cost goods for their farming and agriculture industry. They are never going to get a vote to reduce tariffs from the northern states because they want protectionist policies, as this is the start of the Industrial Revolution here in America. Yeah, it's a pretty... And then you've got the mid-Atlantic states that are somewhere in between. So they wanted to make the legislation a little bit easier to pass. They wanted to establish an executive who could actually enforce these laws. And they wanted to set up a separate judiciary in order to evaluate, did that exceed the power of the government? Or more accurately, they just wanted a judiciary for true legal reasons, as a trial court and a civil court to handle lawsuits or anything else like that. And to varying degrees, they did all want a stronger government. And actually, many anti-federalists were in agreement that the Articles were in dire need of revision. Most anti-federalists were like, yeah, the Articles are not great, but this Constitution is the wrong way to go about it. The Federalists said, well, come on, that's bad. And they would argue that, no, this is not entirely... this is not setting up a monarchy and without the crown. This isn't, some totalitarian government. This isn't a tyrant or a tyranny that we're setting up. This is a republic. And, we're giving the people a say. They have the House of Representatives. And they have their state legislatures that they all have a say in. And those state legislatures will pick the senators. It's indirect, but the people do have a say in who their senators are. They just have to vote in local elections to get senators that they want. And they do, to an extent, have a say in who becomes president, because the state legislatures pick the electors who pick the president. And guess who picks the state legislatures? The people. So in a roundabout way, everyone is a voice of the people. It's just, we want to make sure that no complete crazies or demagogues get into office. And that Hamilton argued, I think this was also Federalist 10, that the Electoral College was necessary to prevent an extremist, a radical, a demagogue from getting into office, because electors could be faithless. They didn't have to necessarily vote for who they were pledged to. And especially in those days, if there was news that that a presidential candidate had passed away, electors would then look at it and say, yeah, we're not voting for a dead guy. So, yeah, they would argue on and say, listen, this is and the truth is the Constitution is a compromise document. It is a document of compromise. And that was because they needed to get, all the states on board. They needed to get the people on board. And they needed to make it palatable to both North and South, large states and small states, wealthy states and poor states. So it's not a perfect document, and the Federalists argued it's not perfect, but there is a process to change it if we need to. And that should cover off any complaints that the anti-federalists have. Now, Hamilton, being Hamilton, was not a fan of too many amendments. He didn't really see the point. So much so that he continuously argued against a Bill of Rights. And he was not a fan of the idea, saying that the federal government is never going to step on your rights. Okay, Hamilton. Yeah, that was a take that aged like milk, considering that he thought that the Alien and Sedition Acts, which were flagrant violations of the First Amendment, didn't go far enough. Yeah, Hamilton, you can understand why I very much dislike Hamilton. Hamilton also used the Federalist Papers as a way of arguing for a national bank, which was a major issue in early American, actually, about till the Civil War and a little bit afterwards. There was always debate about, do we need a national bank? Should state banks be enough? What is the role of the Treasury Department? And all that stuff. We currently have a national bank called the Federal Reserve. And Hamilton would be very happy with this. Others would not. And the whole point Hamilton wanted, the reason why Hamilton wanted a national bank is so that the United States could establish international credit, which had already been effectively established. But the reality is he wanted it so that they could establish a national debt by assuming the states, all of the states' war debts, right? And that would be used so that the U.S. could borrow to procure ships or, build internal improvements, stuff like that. Hamilton saw a very robust role for the federal government. Madison, to a lesser extent, did. Madison, as you will later find out, actually, to an extent, became an ideological opponent of the Hamiltonians. And John Jay kind of just did his own thing, which is, yeah, that's the funny thing. But, yeah, the Federalist Papers were pretty much an argument in favor of why the Constitution needed to be ratified. Now, of course, the Constitution was ratified, so you could argue that the Federalists won. But next week we're going to take a look and notice how just right, hammer, meet, nail on the head the anti-Federalists were. Because a lot of their arguments wound up coming to pass. Even with the protections they recommended, they've still come to pass, which is scary. But anyway, that's for the future, probably next week. And I'm still debating which anti-federalist to use as a portrait. We'll see. Take it easy, all. Have a very nice evening, and I'll see you all next time. I may try live streaming tomorrow, probably late, just because it's the only time I can get OBS to work with YouTube. Take it easy, all. Bye-bye.